up with is to put the
Put chairs
tables,
in the middle.
put chairs, what we'll do is, we'll quickly move the tables away and have everyone bring their chairs into the circle. So we'll leave the dance floor empty. That was the idea.
So the other side was that is that the people that paid to come to the dinner to be with him want to be front and center,
Hmm,
as opposed to the people who snore and just come for the other.
okay. Because we're going to want to make a circle anyway. We're going to want to get rid of the tables anyway for the outing. I'm sure it's fine either way. Okay. So we were learning yesterday about some of the halacha regarding dissolving a partnership, and Marv sent out something about, with Ontario law, right? About the dissolution, the unilateral dissolution of a partnership, which isn't always easy to do. But okay. Sheila, halacha ravachas biyadenu hamishtatif im chaveru bistam lo yishana miminhag hamadina ba'os schara. Well, so we have a well-established halacha that if you enter into partnership in a certain business, then you can't change the standard practice of that place in dealing with that merchandise. In other words, if there's already a standard uh, industry standard, for that particular kind of business, you're not allowed to deviate unless you get permission from your partner. Another important halacha is that you can't relocate unilaterally. You can't bring in other people into the partnership, nor can you engage in another business without consulting first with your partner. Because, let's say you're in partnership with a guy, and then you decide to open up a second business, which is going to require um, a certain amount of your time and resources to be able to give attention to that other business. So your partner has to know that. V'lo yimkar bahakafa, ela darvar shedarko lihimacher tamid bahakafa. Nor would you be allowed to sell something on credit to a customer unless it's the standard to sell that thing on credit. In other words, if you and your partner have an established policy that it's cash and carry, you can't make an exception without consulting first with your partner. V'lo yafkid biyad acherim ela im kein hisnu mitchila o she'asa kein midas hashutav. Nor can you give the merchandise over to somebody else to watch over it, again, unless they have an already pre-existing understanding, a condition that they made already at the, beforehand, that you did or that you consulted first with your partner. V'yeshlach, or okay, so this all makes sense. The one issue that really needs to be emphasized is that if you're in a partnership, you're not allowed to that the understanding is that the assumption is the partner is going to be engaged in this full time. You're not allowed to open up another business on the side without disclosing this to your partner. That also is a halacha, and it only makes sense. It's like when you enter into a partnership, you become obligated almost like an employee to that business. So just like an employee would not be allowed to take another job without disclosing that to their employer, right? That's usually implicit in the work contract if it's a full-time job. So too a partner can't start engaging in other businesses unless he discloses this to his partner.
What do you mean by not taking another job? Someone wants to work in the restaurant at night, he's working in my warehouse, he wants to make extra money, he wants to work 4 hours at night in a restaurant. Why does he have to tell me?
He has to tell you because it might compromise his work.
Half the guys working have night jobs too.
Mhm.
What's the difference between that and going to learn for 3 hours?
You could argue that once the 5 o'clock bell rings,
It's your time.
it's his time. He can do with it
That's
whatever he
the
wants.
point. It's not my
Right,
business.
right.
Unless he's working in a competing business.
Right.
That could be
Yeah,
detrimental to my business, but he wants to be, I have guys that work as waiters.
yeah.
Yeah, well, generally employees are allowed to moonlight, but not to the extent that it interferes with. their-
Right.
See, that's a given.
their own
So-
life.
You know, he's not gonna be
But
sleeping.
partners are different. Partners are
Partners.
actually fiduciaries of each other. They're agents of each other, and they have to devote their entire work, headspace and all that and efforts to the partnership. And can't take for profits and stuff like that from other businesses. They have to devote their entire.
Unless they disclose
let's
it.
say,
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So v'yesh lachkor, ma hadinim hashutav shino v'hitasek b'schora uv'mammon hashutvas shelo kafi tanai hashutvas. So let's think about this. What will be the din if one of the partners decides to depart from the standard procedure and he decides to engage either in the merchandise or the money of the partnership of the corporate entity without fulfilling the conditions that he was supposed to? Hayim ha'efsed alav bilvad ve'harevach sherviach shaykh lo bilvad, o berevach yishlach lo ben shnei hashutfin. So the question is, what if he decides, you know what, my partners wouldn't agree, the widgets that we sell, we only sell to certified widget retailers, okay? But I have an opportunity to sell some widgets to this guy who's a little bit shady. So I'll buy the widgets from the company and then I'll sell them to this guy. And so the partners find out about it after the fact and they say, well, you got to split the profits with us. Even though what you did was against corporate policy, you don't have to split the profits with us. He said, the partner says, well, I bought the widgets from the company. So I was doing this, I was doing a side hustle. Why should I have to pay the company?
He has to account for money that he made on the side, so. Yeah. I don't want him as a partner.
You don't want him as a partner. Yeah. Well, all right. So hamishtatef im chavero v'holach v'yitasek b'schor v'mammon hashutvis lo kamo shehisnu b'tchilas hashutvis. If a person is in a partnership with another guy, and that partner went ahead and started dealing with the merchandise or the money of the corporation against the established policies of that corporation. Im hifsid ha'hefsid alos shutaf bilvad. If he loses money off of that endeavor, he's got to absorb 100% of the loss. Aval im hirviach kagon sheishtatif b'momenim acherim o mochar bahakafa. But if he ends up making money off of this, let's say, risky endeavor, and he ends up, let's say, partnering with somebody else off the books, right? Or he gave this merchandise on credit to someone, even though that was against corporate policy. Or if he does a side hustle with other merchandise, okay, v'chol kayotze bozeh, chayev lachlok berevach im hashutaf hasheni. He has to split all the profits with his partner. So, if it's a completely different business, and he's disclosed that I'm going to be engaging in something else to his partner, that's something else. But here he's actually commingling his side hustle with the corporate funds or with the corporate merchandise. So there, if he loses money, he's got to pay back the company 100%. If he makes money, he's got to put it back into the company and split the profits. V'mshina delokamo shehisnu v'achar kach hodi l'shutaf hasheni v'hiskim l'masha osa shneim cholkim gam be'efsed. If, however, he acts unilaterally and then after the fact reveals it to his partner, and his partner says, "You shouldn't have done it, but now that you've done it, okay, fine, we'll accept it." Then, if the prospect loses money, so then it's the company's loss. Venira kol zeh bidvarim shamarnu la'el v'hiskim imo hashutav hasheni. But that's only if the partner agrees. Avalim echad me'ashutvim asus schar bidvarim hasurim benevelos utrefos v'chayotze bahem hagam she'osa kein al das hashutav hasheni hahefsid eno ela dafka l'shutav she'mitasek ba'otam hadvarim hasurim bilvad. But let's say the partner who's a little bit more of a risk taker consults with his partner and says, we have a kosher meat business, but I realized that you can make a lot of money on the treif business on the side. It's not our official policy because we don't want to lose our hechsher from court, and we're both from guys, but I have an opportunity to transport together with our kosher meat. I'm going to transport some treif meat as well and send it over to, Oshawa or wherever it's going. And they're going to pay me just for the transport. So the guy says, great. Unfortunately, the deal goes sour. The guy loses money on the deal. Even though the partner had agreed to that, the partner does not take the loss and the company does not take the loss. Why? Because he was engaging in something that was usser to engage in. Okay. Or if he was doing something that was criminal, even if it's with the knowledge of the other partners, if he loses only for himself.
Rabbi, there's situations in the city where you have caterers who have a kosher and a non-kosher company,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
To me, that's not a good thing to do.
yeah,
But the court has allowed it in the past.
yes.
Like Zuchter Burke, I think for many years did that.
And I think Encore catering,
They still do.
As far as I know. Maybe they changed.
I think they sold the company, just
there's a
sold.
company called, I think Encore Catering, here in Southern, yeah.
Could be.
They had one of each.
Yeah, to me that just doesn't. I mean, I think that it's sort of like grandfathered in because when you think about the evolution of the frum community in Toronto, you could understand like in the 1930s or 40s, that was the only way for a kosher caterer to survive, when there was such a small kosher business, to be had. But today, it just doesn't make sense to allow it. But I don't know. For some reason, it's still tolerated. Okay, but that's the business model. Here, the business model is we're engaging in everything kosher, everything on the up and up. We're going to do something shady on the side. But look, I don't want to, you told me about it, but I know about it, but I don't want to know about it. In other words, that's
And
the
that
kind.
gets you off, that gets the partnership.
It gets the company off because we basically tell the guy, it's your risk. It's your risk. If the company makes money on it, great. But what this Rav Cohen is saying, that if everyone knows that it's not permitted, it's against the law, or it's dealing with halachically prohibited goods, so then
So was it the actual because intrinsically they're dealing with meat, or is it the transport? But can you transport, if you're in the trucking business, you can't transport?
if you're in the trucking business,
You can transport anything.
you're allowed to transport anything.
They're in the catering business. Or
They're in the meat business, the food business, right?
More generically, we're saying that the partnership would benefit from the upside risk, but not from the downside.
Correct. That's what he's arguing. V'yesh omrim shegam bisurim hadin shava shimnoda l'shutaf hasheni v'yiskim l'mashos l'shutaf harishon hahefsed al shneim. But there are others who disagree, and they say if the partner is aware of what's going on,
Yeah.
so he's equally responsible.
Yeah, that sounds.
Okay,
seems to sit
so
right.
you
To go back to the kosher thing, it's a little off topic, but if you're going to an event and it's a caterer like Encore, who they do both, I just Googled it.
Yeah.
They'll serve you kosher and a non-kosher event. Are you allowed to be comfortable when they bring you out your double wrapped meal? And there's no mashgiach in the kitchen. Is that?
So if they're bringing you a double wrapped meal and it's sealed when they put it up in front of you, there's no issue of kashrus. It's just like getting served a meal on an airline.
Mhm.
It's like an airline meal. where, you can have it because you can see from the seals that it's totally kosher, even though there's no mashgiach. Can you imagine if you needed a mashgiach on the airline?
For like 6 airline.
Let's sit right next to you.
How would Air Canada deal with the, Yankel Schnorr, Captain, I have something important to tell you. And the stewardess opened the seal. Yeah. All right, but anyway.
To the plane.
But here's the thing, when it comes to a kosher catered meal at a non-kosher event, you should avoid that. You should avoid that. It's not a good idea to do that. In other words, first of all, you shouldn't be attending a wedding that's a treifa wedding.
It's business, business. So
Yeah.
I have this every year. I go out to Winnipeg and there's 400 people, this big event. And everyone's having their Fleischbrot and out comes the waiter bringing my thing with my double sealed thing and they come
Right.
out and they
So-
present me.
So if it's a business thing, then that's fine.
Yeah, there's many people, family who are not, are in this situation.
And the other exception I was going to say is family. When it's family, you make an exception. But when it's not family, let's say you have friends who are not so religious and they're making a wedding and it's in a non-kosher venue, you should make a point of telling them, I wish I could be there, but I can't because it's not a kosher venue. Oh, but we're willing to make kosher accommodations. Yeah, I just can't bring myself to sit down with a bunch of my brothers and sisters who are going to be eating crab right next to me. It's something that you should feel that sense of responsibility to say, I love you, but I can't be at your wedding. I'm sorry.
Even if it's gonna push them away.
Well,
I think it's a judgment call,
listen,
isn't it?
listen, you have to weigh the circumstances. You have to weigh the circumstances. If you feel that there's a way to bring these people, you're in a relationship and you're working on them, and the guy's, coming to shul every Shabbos and he's really curious, and then you have to make a calculus, right? Right? Whether that's the right move in that unique situation. But from a policy standpoint, I think the policy should be for every person that, I don't attend weddings that, Rabbanim will not be Masader Kiddushin on weddings that are not kosher, even if they're willing to make kosher accommodations, but there's always an exception to the rule. Like you said, let's say I have a unique relationship with this couple, and for whatever reason, the groom wants me to be his Masader Kiddushin. The bride's side insisted on a non-kosher venue. There was nothing that could be done. I had a case like that once, many, many years ago, where the guy had a life-threatening illness, and we had developed a very close relationship, and we were learning together every week. And he was really coming along in his Yiddishkeit, but then he got engaged and married a very nice lady, but who had nothing to do with Yiddishkeit. And so he wasn't Orthodox at that time. He wasn't Dati. And so they agreed that it would be a non-kosher venue, but he wanted me to officiate at his wedding. And I felt in that unique circumstance where we had gone through his cancer together, and there had been such a bond that had been created that still exists to this day, that
Is there an issue like that they should be married to halachos to override the fact that there's trade?
yeah, so that was part of the calculus. Now, I didn't stay for the reception, I didn't stay, but I was there for the chuppah, and she had, she was wearing a very revealing dress. All of these things, they go along with,
Yeah.
it's all part of the package, right? Like
Yeah,
there's nowhere. Yeah, that's the
Two
question.
glasses.
How do you say a bracha, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's like
What do you do
it's
in
like a
a-
sea of
in a-
skin.
In
Yeah.
a situation where you have now like the 80 Kedushin are not Shomer Shabbos, or I remember Rabbi Tab wouldn't allow people to make brachas at a chuppah who weren't Shomer Shabbos, and it caused a lot of friction. Some people actually left the shul because they were infuriated, but a Zaida who was an outward Mechol Shabbos.
Yeah, that to me is an added level of stringency that just does it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So that,
And 8
but
Kedushin.
80 Kiddushin, of course, have to be Shomer Shabbos. So that's like that invalidates the wedding if they're not Shomer Shabbos.
Have you had a situation where people had 8 Kedushin who were like their buds and they're not from, does that come up?
I had once, well, I make it very clear that they have to be Shabbos observant. I had one case where I may have mentioned this to you. Oh, okay. So I had one case where I I I I made it very clear that they have to be Sabbath observant, and if you don't have friends that are Sabbath observant, I'll be one of the witnesses, and then we'll get the caterer or the mashgiach to be the other witness. We can do it. But he says, no, no, Rabbi, I have friends who are Shabbos observant. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. And this was here at the Bayit. He brings over his two buds, and I could tell,
You have dreadlocks.
I could tell right away that there was something fishy. So I went over to one of the guys and I said, you're 100% Shomer Shabbos, right? Oh, yes, Rabbi. Yes, Rabbi. So, Sabbath observance, like you won't even answer the phone on a Saturday, right? He says, well, once in a while. I said, okay, with all due respect, we're going to have to get another witness because we need someone who's like all in. And so the guy's walking out of the room, and then the chassan sees him, and I could hear them. He says, the chassan says to the guy, "Why'd you have to tell the rabbi?" And and then the guy says, "Dude, he's a rabbi." So anyway, it happens. It happens. I had one other case that I wasn't the Masader Kiddushin over, but there was a guy in my Kehillah in LA, and I got into a lot of hot water where he was a Kohen and he wanted to marry a woman who had been previously married. And he was able to get a heter from Rav Gedalia Schwartz of blessed memory, who was the Av based in of the RCA's based in. And he got a heter from Rav Gedalia based on the fact that one of the witnesses at this woman's wedding was not a kosher witness.
Wow. So it's not real. It's not a real.
So she wasn't halachically. He ruled that she had never been halachically married. Now, she had kids, married for years, and had kids. And he gave her a heter to marry this guy that's coming. Yeah, it was a controversial psak. Okay.
We had our own here.
Yeah, we had our own here as well. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so he brings in so the Rambam basically writes, Hamishtatef im chavero bistam lo yishana miminag hamedina ba'os aschora. The Rambam writes, if you when you enter into partnership, you cannot change from the standard practice for that merchandise, the industry standard. V'lo yelech lamakom acher, you can't go to another place without the consent of the partnership. V'lo yishtatef b'hem acherim, you can't partner with other people. V'lo yafkid biyad acherim, you can't allow the merchandise to be left with others without notifying the partnership. Ela yitasek b'schora acheres. But I guess the language of the Rambam is that you'd have to go into business. You'd have to go into a separate business if you want to with other people. You cannot sell items on credit unless that's the industry standard. Unless you do this, unless this was negotiated beforehand, or you consulted with your partners. And in the second halacha, the Rambam writes, Echad min hashutvim sha'avar u'machar b'hakaf o piresh b'yam o halach l'makom acher, that if one of the partners violates the terms of the partnership, so let's say he sells items on interest, on credit rather, or he goes and takes the merchandise by sea to another faraway place, and that in itself is speculative, right? It's very risky. Or he or he engages in another with other merchandise that he was not part of the partnership agreement. Kol pechas sheyavo machmas she'avar chayav l'shalim levado. Any losses he incurs on his own. V'im yihiyeh im sham schar machmas she'avar machmas she'avar haschar le'emtza kefi ma shehisnu v'chulei. But if there was profit, then they split the partnership splits the profit. Therefore, the Rambam writes, if a person gives his friend in the partnership to go and buy wheat, let's say, we're going to invest in wheat, and then we're going to sell the wheat. So here's my portion of the shutfis. We're each going to put in $100, and then you're going to go with my 100 and your 100, and you're going to go buy wheat. And then we're going to go sell the wheat. V'holach v'kanasorim, and the guy instead buys barley. Or vice versa. So the Rambam's example is like if you changed what you were supposed to do, you bought the wrong merchandise. So then if the company ends up selling it and we take a loss, so the partner who messed up has to assume the full loss. But if we make a profit, we split the profit evenly. So then he goes and he quotes the Gemara that is the source for the Rambam's psak, and then he quotes the Rambam in dealing with something with forbidden merchandise. So in Hilchos Shmita, the Rambam writes, "She'asr lasos chor beperush shvius, velo bebechoros, velo benevelos, velo betrefos, velo betrumos, velo bishkatzim, velo biramoshim." That a Jew is not allowed to deal with Shemitah produce, with bechor animals, with treifa meat, with truma, with shkatzim or ramoshim, with bugs or other. Well, let's say.
Selling grasshopper? No, grasshoppers are kosher. Like selling
Well,
something.
no, you're selling non-kosher grasshopper protein. Costco in certain places now sells protein powder that's made out of crushed grasshoppers. So
No, I missed that.
you didn't see that?
No.
Now, I don't know if you can get it here in Toronto, but there is like the Kirkland brand. You can get protein powder that's made from crushed grasshoppers. And it probably doesn't have any taste, but it's pure protein, So you got to be careful when you buy protein powder. I mean, that's always been the issue.
Yeah.
Now, v'im avar v'asa haschar le'emsa, and if a partner goes ahead and does that, and engages in the sale of items that are halachically prohibited, haschar le'emsa, the other partners are allowed to share in those profits. V'yera'elishim hifsid le'atzmo v'pnei sha'avar. But then the Rambam says, but if the partner loses money on this speculative endeavor of selling treif meat, so then he has to assume the loss. So v'yesh la'ayin amay hachakasav Rambam v'yera'elishim hifsid shari b'halacha beis kasav pashtus kol pchas sheyavo machmas shavar chayv l'shalim levado. So this is the area of controversy in the language of the Rambam. Why does the Rambam say that it would seem to me that if he loses money, he has to assume the loss? So it seems that the Rambam is trying to say something that's even more, let's say, controversial, that even though the other partners knew what the guy was doing, then the other partners are going to be off the hook.
I understand that if you win, you win, and if you lose, it's solely yours. I don't understand that. How can you profit from something that was trade that you dealt in? And you share the profit, but if you lose, it's all yours. That's a good deal.
So it is a good deal, but if
What's the angle around?
If the partnership decides jointly to engage in this, so then
That would be different.
that would be different. But if this guy goes ahead and engages in it, he says, listen, I'm doing something on the side, the company will benefit from it, The partners say, this is not our official policy because we're from Yidden. Wink, wink, but they know about it. So even there, the Rambam is suggesting that in that case, the company can keep the profits, but if there's a loss, the guy has to assume the loss. So that's really not so clear.
Clear.
Yeah, it's not really clear. He's making a diuk from the language of the Rambam, which may or may not be true. Okay, so we'll